Chapter 1. The Hidden Chamber. The air was thick with dust and anticipation as Dr. Maya Stone led her team deeper into the Great Pyramid's inner corridors. Armed with state-of-the-art scanning equipment, they moved with both reverence and excitement, each step resonating with the weight of millennia. To Maya, this was more than just another archaeological dig. It was the culmination of years spent studying ancient texts, cryptic symbols, and following whispers about an elusive, hidden chamber that no one else dared search for. Just days before, the team's scans had revealed an unusual anomaly in empty space that did not align with any known chambers or passages. Buried deep, far beyond the reach of previous explorers, it was like the pyramid itself had been designed to hide it, leaving no hint of its existence on any blueprint or ancient plan. Some of the team members murmured about curses and restless spirits, but Maya dismissed such thoughts. She was here for the science. The truth no myth would deter her from uncovering the secrets entombed here. Maya's eyes, sharp and determined, glistened with a rare kind of excitement as she studied the monitor displaying their progress. "This chamber has been hidden for thousands of years," she said, her voice barely containing her excitement. "If we're right, what we find in there might change everything we know about ancient Egypt." The team exchanged glances, some skeptical, others intrigued. Yet, as they worked tirelessly to drill through the dense limestone, an uneasy silence seemed to settle around them. It was subtle at first, a faint vibration, almost like a heartbeat, pulsing through the walls. Maya noticed it, but brushed it aside, attributing it to the machinery. But then, she heard something stranger, something she couldn't quite explain, a faint, whisper-like sound, almost like her name being called from somewhere within the stone. Shaking off her unease, she redirected her focus. After hours of delicate drilling, they finally breached the wall. Dust billowed out, thick and almost oppressive, as if the chamber itself were exhaling after centuries of silence. One by one, they entered the dark, stale air of the newly revealed space. Flashlights flickered and beams danced across ancient stone, illuminating carvings that bore no resemblance to traditional Egyptian symbols. Instead of familiar hieroglyphs, strange angular patterns lined the walls, and at the chamber's center lay an enormous, intricately carved stone sarcophagus. Maya approached, her footsteps echoing in the eerie silence. Her fingers traced the peculiar inscriptions on the sarcophagus, alien to her well-trained eyes. She couldn't shake the sensation that something was watching her from the shadows, an invisible presence lurking, waiting. The inscriptions, though unreadable, conveyed a strange energy. There were hints of something ancient, something far older than the pyramid itself. "What do you think, Dr. Stone?" murmured James, her second in command, his voice barely a whisper. "Whatever this is, it's not like anything I've seen before," she replied, a frown creasing her brow. "These symbols, they don't belong to any known Egyptian dynasty or culture." "Do you think it's a warning?" asked Lena, one of the junior archaeologists, her voice trembling slightly. Maya hesitated. She'd encountered ancient warnings before, curses meant to deter grave robbers, cautionary words etched by the hands of priests and scribes. But this felt different. These symbols seemed less like a warning and more like a declaration of something powerful, something meant to be contained. "We won't know until we open it," she said, her voice firm, though the chill in her spine betrayed her calm demeanor. As they prepared to move the heavy stone lid, that faint whisper grew louder, filling the chamber with an unsettling hum. The team exchanged worried glances, but Maya was resolute. The lid finally gave way with a slow, grating sound, revealing a dark, gaping void within. The air grew colder, and the oppressive atmosphere weighed down on them, pressing into their lungs with each breath. Inside, instead of a body, they found a peculiar artifact, a small, black stone shaped like an obelisk, inscribed with more of the alien symbols that seemed to pulse and shift under their flashlights. Maya felt an overwhelming compulsion to touch it, to feel the stone under her fingertips. Her hand moved almost on its own, reaching toward the obelisk, driven by an intense curiosity. The moment her fingers brushed against its surface, a shock ran up her arm, like icy fire searing through her veins. For a split second, her mind was overwhelmed with visions, fragmented images of an endless dark sky, unfamiliar constellations, and a towering, ominous figure cloaked in shadows. The vision was gone as quickly as it came, leaving her breathless and shaken. "Dr. Stone? Are you all right?" James' voice pulled her back to reality, concern etched across his face. "Yes, I think so," she replied, though her voice wavered. She glanced down at her hand, feeling an unnatural coldness where she touched the stone. But she shook it off, determined not to let her team see her hesitation. As they documented the chamber and prepared to transport the obelisk for further study, Maya couldn't shake the sense that they disturbed something that should have remained hidden. She felt an eerie pull to return to the stone, to touch it again, to uncover whatever secrets it held. But there was also a part of her, a quiet, rational part screaming at her to seal the chamber, to leave the obelisk buried and forgotten. As they exited the pyramid for the night, the whispers followed her, growing louder with each step. They seemed to burrow into her mind, speaking in an unintelligible language, each word heavy with a sense of warning, or perhaps a threat. Little did Maya know, the secrets of the chamber were far darker than she had ever imagined, and by uncovering them, she had unleashed something ancient, something that had been waiting, watching, and now, awakening. The team's camp outside the pyramid was unusually quiet that night. The usual hum of excited chatter was replaced with an uneasy silence. Even the desert, typically alive with the distant sounds of nocturnal creatures, felt still, as if holding its breath. Maya sat alone by the flickering campfire, her thoughts consumed by the strange obelisk they had uncovered. She traced the lines of the alien symbols from memory, trying to recall every detail, but the shapes seemed to blur and shift in her mind, evading full comprehension. As the fire crackled, she felt her hand drift involuntarily to the pocket of her jacket, where a small piece of the chamber's wall had broken off during their dig. She'd picked it up absent-mindedly, intending to study its material later, but now, holding it, she felt an inexplicable connection to it, a subtle, pulsing energy that synced with her own heartbeat. "Dr. Stone," James called out, startling her. He was standing a few feet away, his face partially obscured by shadow. "You should get some rest. We've got a long day tomorrow, and everyone's a little on edge." Maya forced a smile, nodding. "You're right. I think this place just has a way of getting under your skin." She tried to laugh, but her voice came out strained. James looked at her, concern deepening in his gaze, but he didn't press further. He knew better than anyone how focused Maya could get when she was close to a breakthrough. Reluctantly, she retired to her tent, but sleep didn't come easily. Her mind buzzed with fragmented thoughts and images from the brief vision she'd had when she touched the obelisk. Each time she closed her eyes, she saw the dark figure from her vision, towering and cloaked, with eyes that glowed like embers in the dark. It felt as though it were looking directly into her, past every layer of her being, into the depths of her soul. As the hours crept by, the whispers returned, soft at first, then louder, filling her tent with an otherworldly hum. She sat up abruptly, heart pounding, convinced she was not alone. But as she looked around, there was nothing, only the dim light from her lantern casting strange, elongated shadows against the canvas. But then, something caught her eye, a faint glow on the back of her hand. She lifted it to her face, her breath catching in her throat. There, etched onto her skin, was a symbol from the obelisk, faint but unmistakably glowing, pulsing in rhythm with her heartbeat. She tried rubbing it off, thinking it was a trick of the light, but the symbol remained, like a brand burned into her flesh. A surge of panic washed over her, but she forced herself to stay calm. She needed answers, and she knew the only place she might find them was back in the chamber. The next morning, Maya gathered her team, her hand wrapped tightly in gauze to conceal the mark. She felt compelled to return to the chamber, to understand the strange pull that seemed to draw her back. The others were visibly nervous, but Maya's unwavering resolve propelled them forward. Inside the pyramid, the air felt different, heavier somehow. The team made their way to the chamber, each footstep echoing ominously in the narrow, winding passages. Maya's heart raced as they re-entered the room. The obelisk sat untouched where they had left it, its dark surface absorbing all light. As they resumed their study, Lena, the youngest member of the team, approached the wall opposite the sarcophagus. She gasped, her fingers brushing against a set of symbols that had gone unnoticed before. "Dr. Stone," "Look at this," she whispered, her voice filled with awe and trepidation. Maya moved closer, squinting at the wall. The symbols were carved in long, flowing lines, different from anything she'd seen before yet. Somehow, they felt familiar. As her eyes traced the carvings, she felt her hand begin to throb, the mark on her skin burning as if reacting to the symbols. "I think this might be some kind of language," Lena murmured, her voice trembling. "I don't recognize it, but there's a pattern, a syntax. It's almost mathematical." As they puzzled over the markings, Maya felt herself drawn again to the obelisk. The whispers grew louder, filling her mind, urging her to touch it again. Against her better judgment, she reached out, her hand hovering just above its surface. "Dr. Stone, wait." James' voice cut through the haze in her mind, grounding her momentarily. He looked at her with a mixture of fear and determination. "I don't think we're dealing with an artifact here. Whatever this is, it's alive. We need to leave it alone." Maya hesitated, the weight of his words pressing down on her. But the pull was too strong. The obelisk seemed to call her name, its voice an intoxicating whisper that drowned out all rational thought. She placed her hand on the stone, feeling a surge of energy flow through her, stronger and more intense than before. Images flooded her mind, a barren landscape under a dark sky, ruins stretching as far as she could see, and in the center, a towering figure shrouded in shadows, its eyes burning with an otherworldly fire. The figure's gaze locked onto hers, and she felt an overwhelming sense of dread, as if she were staring into the face of an ancient, malevolent force. A voice echoed in her mind, deep and resonant, speaking in a language she couldn't understand yet instinctively felt. "You have freed me," it said, the words resonating within her, filling her with a cold, paralyzing fear. "The curse is broken, and soon, all will remember." Maya stumbled back, the connection severed, leaving her breathless and disoriented. Her team watched her, eyes wide with terror. She looked down at her hand. The mark was brighter now, pulsating with a life of its own, as though it were an extension of the obelisk's power. "We need to leave," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Now." As they hastily gathered their equipment, the whispers grew louder, filling the chamber with a cacophony of voices, all speaking in that same ancient language. The walls trembled, and the temperature dropped, frost forming on the stones as an unnatural chill permeated the air. They made their way out of the chamber, but as they reached the entrance, Maya felt an invisible force pulling her back. It was as if the pyramid itself was alive, a vast entity that had been dormant for centuries and was now awakening, hungry, and aware of her presence. The team finally emerged into the harsh desert sunlight, gasping for air, their bodies shivering despite the heat. But Maya knew this was only the beginning. The mark on her hand burned like a brand, a constant reminder of the presence she had awoken within the pyramid's ancient walls. As they returned to camp, Maya's thoughts churned with a mix of fear and curiosity. She had uncovered something far more dangerous than any tomb or relic force that had been sealed away for reasons she couldn't yet fathom. And now that it was awake, she felt its gaze following her, watching, waiting for the moment when it would reveal itself in its true form. But one thing was clear: this was no mere archaeological discovery. It was a warning, an ancient curse, and she was its chosen conduit. Chapter 2. Unleashing the Darkness. The following night was filled with an uneasy silence. The desert, typically alive with sounds of nature, seemed to hold its breath around the campsite. Maya lay in her tent, wide awake, staring at the gauze wrapped around her hand. The strange mark had intensified, glowing faintly under the fabric, almost as if it had become part of her. Each pulse of light felt like a heartbeat, a constant, unsettling reminder of what she had touched. Unable to shake her sense of dread, she finally gave up on sleep and sat up. As she did, a cold draft swept through the tent, and she swore she heard faint whispers just like the ones in the chamber. She dismissed it as her imagination, the product of exhaustion and anxiety. But the whispers grew louder, filling her mind with words she couldn't understand, yet felt familiar, as if they were seared into her memory from another time. Suddenly, a piercing scream shattered the silence outside. Maya sprang to her feet and rushed out, heart pounding. The other team members were already gathered around Lena's tent, pale and shaken. "Lena, are you all right?" Maya called, her voice tinged with worry. No response. James, standing closest, looked at her with fear in his eyes. She was talking in her sleep, something about shadows and an ancient curse. Then she screamed and went silent. Maya pushed past him and unzipped Lena's tent, but the sight inside left her speechless. Lena was lying on her back, her eyes wide open, staring blankly at the ceiling. Her face was contorted in terror, mouth frozen in a silent scream. Her arms were covered in strange marks, similar to the one on Maya's hand, except they twisted and coiled up her skin like living tendrils. Maya's mind raced, trying to make sense of what she was seeing. "Lena?" She shook the young archaeologist gently, but there was no response. Lena's skin was cold to the touch, as if life had been drained from her, leaving only an empty shell. The team backed away, murmuring anxiously, fear gripping each of them. Maya felt a mixture of horror and guilt. She had pushed them to uncover that chamber, to unearth something that should have remained hidden. We need to call for help," one of the crew muttered. This is beyond us, Dr. Stone." Maya looked down at her hand, the symbol glowing even brighter now. She clenched her fist, fighting a sense of dread that seemed to creep from the depths of her soul. "No," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. "We're not leaving until we understand what we've found." "Are you serious?" James snapped, his voice wavering between anger and fear. She's practically catatonic. We need to get out of here before this. Whatever this is spreads to the rest of us." But Maya was resolute. Something about the obelisk called to her, a whisper deep in her mind that told her they were on the brink of discovering something monumental, something that transcended human history. She couldn't abandon it now, even though every rational part of her knew that staying was dangerous. As dawn approached, Maya gathered what remained of her team. "If any of you wish to leave, I won't stop you," she said, trying to project a calm she didn't feel. "But I believe we're on the verge of unlocking something extraordinary. This isn't just archaeology, it's a glimpse into a past we've never imagined. I need to see this through." A few of the team members packed their belongings, fear evident in their eyes as they prepared to leave. But a small group, including James, hesitated, loyalty and curiosity keeping them tethered to Maya's side. After a tense silence, James sighed and stepped forward. "All right, Dr. Stone, we'll see it through. But if anything else happens, we're leaving?" Maya nodded, grateful but still haunted by doubt. They set off back to the chamber, the desert sun casting long shadows that seemed to follow them like specters. When they re-entered the pyramid, the air inside felt colder, denser, as though it were infused with the weight of centuries of secrets. As they reached the chamber, Maya noticed that the marks on the walls had begun to glow faintly, casting an eerie green light across the room. The obelisk sat at the center, silent and foreboding, almost as if it were waiting for them. Maya approached it cautiously, her heart pounding. She could feel the entity within the stone, its presence thick and ominous, pressing down on her mind like a dark shroud. She wanted to run, to leave this place and never look back, but the pull was too strong. She had to know what was inside. She placed her hand on the obelisk once more, and this time, the visions came stronger, clearer. She saw scenes of devastation, a barren world under an eternal night, ruined cities stretching across the landscape, their skeletal remains shrouded in darkness. At the center of it all stood the same cloaked figure she had seen before, towering and malevolent, its eyes glowing with an intense, otherworldly light. The figure turned towards her, and in that moment, she felt its gaze pierce her very soul. She was no longer Maya Stone, archaeologist. She was nothing more than a fragile, mortal being in the presence of something infinitely more ancient and powerful. "You have broken the seal," the voice echoed in her mind, deep and resonant, as though it came from the depths of the universe itself. "You have unleashed the darkness." The vision faded, and Maya stumbled back, gasping. Her team rushed to her side, concern etched on their faces, but she barely registered their presence. The obelisk was no mere artifact, it was a prison, a containment device built by a civilization far older than humanity to trap an entity of unimaginable power. What did you see?" James asked, his voice laced with fear. Maya looked at him, her eyes wide with terror. This is no curse. It's a warning. That thing inside the obelisk's not from this world. It's something beyond our understanding. And by uncovering it, we've set it free. As she spoke, the chamber began to tremble, dust and debris falling from the ceiling as the walls seemed to pulse with a life of their own. The markings on the walls flared brightly, casting the room in a sickly green light. Maya could feel the entity's presence growing stronger, pressing against the barrier that had held it for centuries. "We have to go," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Now." The team bolted out of the chamber, their footsteps echoing through the ancient corridors as they raced towards the exit. But as they ran, Maya felt a cold weight settle in her chest, a dark certainty that they couldn't escape what they had unleashed. The entity was awake, and it was only a matter of time before it broke free entirely. As they emerged into the blinding desert sunlight, Maya turned back, feeling the pyramid's shadow loom over her like a harbinger of doom. The mark on her hand burned fiercely, a constant reminder of the ancient power she had disturbed. They had unlocked the chamber. They had awakened the darkness. And now, there was no going back. Chapter 3: The Alien Curse. Back at the camp, Maya was a shadow of herself. The events of the past night played over in her mind, her thoughts spiraling as she tried to comprehend the magnitude of what they had unleashed. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw that barren, alien landscape, the desolate cities under an eternal night, the shadowed figure with burning eyes, and the whispered words that had left her shaken. "You have unleashed the darkness." The remaining team members gathered around, their faces etched with a mixture of concern and fear. James sat across from her, his jaw clenched, arms crossed tightly over his chest. "We need answers, Maya. What exactly are we dealing with here?" Maya took a shaky breath. She felt her hand throbbing under the gauze, the mark glowing faintly even in the morning light. It's something ancient. Not Egyptian, not from any civilization we've ever known. The obelisk, it was a prison, a container for something far older and more dangerous than anything we could imagine. Whatever that thing is, it's alive, and it's powerful. Lena, who had partially recovered from her earlier shock, looked down at her hands, visibly trembling. "So, it's not just a curse, then? It's something sentient?" Maya nodded. "Yes. The inscriptions weren't warnings to keep people out of the chamber, they were meant to keep it locked away. The ancient Egyptians, or maybe even an older civilization, must have discovered it, realized its power, and sealed it inside the pyramid." James frowned, his face pale. "But why would they go to such lengths to hide it here, of all places?" Maya looked away, her voice low. "Because they were protecting us. Whoever or whatever trapped that entity did so because they knew that if it ever escaped, it could destroy everything." She paused, swallowing hard. "And now, we've undone all of their work." The group fell silent, the weight of their mistake settling heavily upon them. For the first time, the reality of the situation sank in. They hadn't simply uncovered an artifact, they had unleashed a force that had been deliberately buried to protect humanity. That evening, as the team gathered their supplies to abandon the site, Maya was drawn to the obelisk one last time, a quiet compulsion tugging at her. She knew it was reckless, but she couldn't leave without understanding more of the entity's nature. Her rational mind warned against it, but the mark on her hand pulsed, as if urging her to return. Ignoring her team's protests, Maya snuck away from the camp and re-entered the pyramid alone. Her flashlight flickered against the rough stone walls, casting long shadows that danced and shifted around her as she descended into the chamber. The obelisk stood in the center, emanating a quiet, almost seductive energy. It was as though it recognized her, calling to her in a language beyond words. Her hand trembled as she reached for it, but this time, she didn't touch the stone. Instead, she knelt before it, tracing the symbols on her skin with her finger, feeling their pulse. She whispered, as if speaking to the entity itself, "What are you?" In response, the air grew cold, and the chamber seemed to dim, as though the very walls were absorbing the light. A deep, resonant voice echoed in her mind, filling her thoughts with images and sounds she couldn't comprehend. "I am the Harbinger," it said, its voice like the rustling of ancient tombs, heavy and dark. I was cast out, bound by the weak who feared my power. They buried me here, far from the stars, far from my kind, to rot in darkness. But you have broken the chains that held me. Maya's heart pounded as she listened, captivated by a mixture of fear and wonder. She sensed its bitterness, its longing for freedom, its deep-rooted hatred for those who had imprisoned it. The entity had been trapped for eons, deprived of its power, its essence scattered across the universe like ashes. Now, with Maya's touch, it had begun to reform, to piece itself back together, drawing strength from the world around it. "Why were you imprisoned?" she dared to ask, her voice barely a whisper. The entity's reply was chilling. "I am darkness incarnate, the void from which no light escapes. Those who imprisoned me feared the truth of my nature. They feared the annihilation I would bring. They were weak, bound by their mortal fears, and they sought to seal me away rather than face what I represent." Maya swallowed, fear gnawing at her. "And what do you want now?" The voice laughed, a sound that seemed to shake the very ground beneath her. "Freedom, human. Freedom to return to my true form, to reclaim my strength, and to spread my darkness across this world." A cold shiver ran through her, but something compelled her to stand her ground. She felt herself connected to this ancient being in a way that defied logic. She was no longer merely an archaeologist, she was the one who had released it, the one to whom it had reached out. And now, she was bound to it, a vessel through which it could communicate, manipulate, and grow stronger. "I won't help you," she said, her voice trembling. "I didn't come here to free a monster." The entity's laughter faded, replaced by a deep, ominous silence. "You think you have a choice? You are marked, human. Your touch has awakened me, and now you are part of me. My strength will grow, and your world will fall." The chamber began to rumble, the walls quaking as cracks formed in the stone, ancient dust falling from the ceiling. Maya stumbled back, fear taking hold as she felt the ground shift beneath her feet. She turned and fled, racing back through the winding corridors as the voice echoed in her mind, growing louder with each step. "You cannot escape me, human. You have opened the door. You are the conduit through which I will return." As she stumbled out of the pyramid and into the open desert, gasping for air, the full horror of her situation crashed down on her. She was marked, bound to the entity by an ancient curse, and now it was using her to regain its strength, to break free from the prison that had held it for so long. She looked down at her hand, the mark now fully visible, burning brighter than ever before. She could feel its power coursing through her veins, a dark and insidious energy that pulsed with each beat of her heart. She knew that every moment she remained connected to it, it grew stronger, feeding off her fear, her curiosity, her very life force. She staggered back to camp, where the others were waiting, their faces pale with worry. They had heard the tremors, seen the dust rising from the pyramid, and feared the worst. "Maya, what happened?" James asked, his voice barely a whisper. She looked at him, her expression hollow, eyes haunted. "We're dealing with something far beyond our understanding, something ancient and malevolent. It's not just a curse, James. It's a being, a force of destruction that was sealed away for a reason. And I've unleashed it." The team exchanged terrified glances, the weight of her words sinking in. They had been drawn here by curiosity and ambition, but now, that same ambition had unleashed a darkness that could consume them all. Maya's voice shook as she continued. "We have to find a way to seal it back, to contain it before it regains its full strength. I don't know how, but we have to try, or the consequences will be catastrophic." With that, they began preparations, digging through every ancient text, every piece of equipment they had brought, desperately searching for any means of undoing what they had set in motion. But even as they worked, Maya could feel the entity growing stronger, its presence lingering in her mind like a dark cloud. The curse had been lifted, the seal broken, and now, with each passing moment, the alien darkness crept closer to freedom, using Maya as its vessel to bring about an age of shadows unlike anything the world had ever seen. Chapter 4. Sacrifice and Salvation. Days passed in a blur of fear and desperation. Maya and the remaining team members pored over every ancient text, every scrap of information they had brought with them, seeking a way to reseal the entity within the obelisk. But with each passing hour, the oppressive presence in Maya's mind grew stronger, its whispers no longer faint or restrained. The entity was relentless, filling her thoughts with dark promises, tempting her with visions of power, knowledge, and an eternity free of human limits. Exhaustion and despair began to take a toll on the team. James had become withdrawn, his face pale and eyes hollow. Lena was still shaken, staring blankly at the ground, occasionally muttering about shadows and curses. Maya herself was haunted by the brand on her hand, now a brilliant, burning mark that seemed to pulse with the entity's strength, binding her to its will. She could feel it burrowing into her mind, eroding her willpower, whispering that she would be the key to its rebirth. But amid the darkness, a flicker of hope emerged. One evening, as Maya pored over a particularly obscure text, she stumbled upon a set of symbols that seemed eerily familiar, symbols that resembled the ones etched onto the walls of the chamber. As she studied them, she felt a memory surface, faint but unmistakable. The symbols were part of an ancient sealing ritual, a ritual once used by an unknown civilization to contain otherworldly forces. She realized that, though the language was foreign, its intent was clear: to trap something that should never be freed. Excitement mingled with terror as she pieced together the steps. The ritual required a sacrifice, a willing soul to become the vessel, to absorb the darkness and prevent it from spreading. It was the ultimate act of self-sacrifice, binding oneself to the entity in order to hold it in perpetual stasis. Maya's heart sank as she understood what this meant. If she performed the ritual, she would become the entity's new prison, trapped in eternal darkness to protect the world. But the entity was aware of her discovery. It surged within her mind, its voice growing frantic, mocking, desperate. "You think you can bind me again, foolish human? You will become nothing but a shadow, a mere speck in the void." Maya closed her eyes, steeling herself. She had brought this curse upon her team, upon herself, and upon the world. She knew what had to be done. The night was cold and eerily still as Maya made her way to the pyramid, her team following in silent, mournful solidarity. James walked beside her, his face etched with sorrow and determination. He had tried to talk her out of it, begging her to consider other options, but she had remained resolute. There was no other way. They entered the chamber one last time. The obelisk stood at the center, silent and ominous, casting long shadows that seemed to stretch and twist toward them. The walls glowed with the strange symbols, flickering as if alive, responding to Maya's presence. She approached the obelisk, feeling its pull, the entity within recognizing her, its last chance at freedom. She began the ritual, tracing the ancient symbols onto her skin with trembling hands, chanting the words she had deciphered from the text. Each word felt like a weight, pressing down on her, binding her closer to the entity. She could feel it resisting, thrashing within her mind, trying to break free. Images flooded her thoughts, visions of destruction, worlds engulfed in shadow, civilizations reduced to ashes. Her team watched in silence, their faces pale and stricken. They couldn't help her now. They could only witness the final act, knowing that Maya was sacrificing herself to save them all. As she completed the final incantation, the air grew thick, almost solid, and a dark energy surged through her body. She gasped as the mark on her hand flared, its light merging with the symbols on her skin, forming a web of glowing lines that pulsed in time with her heartbeat. The entity's voice filled her mind, louder than ever, screaming in fury. "You cannot contain me. I am eternal. I am darkness." But Maya held firm, focusing on the words, grounding herself in the ritual. She visualized herself as a barrier, a wall of light, holding back the endless dark that threatened to consume everything. Slowly, she felt the entity's power diminish, its presence retreating, pushed back by the ritual's binding force. Finally, with one last surge of energy, she forced the entity back into the obelisk, sealing it with her own essence. She felt herself being drawn into the darkness, her consciousness slipping away, merging with the ancient power. She was no longer Maya Stone. She was the vessel, the barrier, the eternal guard that would hold the entity at bay.